The Florida Podcast Network, the voice of Florida. The Directory Dial-Up, where you meet Florida's podcasting talent. This is Jaime with the Florida Podcast Network, and I am so excited to be bringing you this series where we introduce you to the podcasting talent right here in Florida by spotlighting different podcasters who have submitted their shows to our directory. You can find our directory, by the way, by going to floridapodcastdirectory.com. Find the shows originating from your own backyard with the interactive pin map there. So on this episode, representing Valrico, I have Bruce Wawrzyniak from Now Hear This Entertainment. Welcome, Bruce.
Thank you, Jaime.
How are you?
Outstanding.
Oh, that's what I love to hear. Happy Friday.
Absolutely.
All right. So how long have you been podcasting, Bruce? I know you're a legend in the field already. How long have you been doing it?
I have been podcasting since February of 2014, so closer to 4 years than 3.5.
That's a great way to put it. I'm closer to 3 than 3.5. So there you go. What made you decide to jump into the world of podcasting to start with?
I knew what podcasting was, but the reason that I jumped into it was because I just thought, this will be a neat marketing tool for my business. This will be a way to expose people who I might not otherwise reach to what my company is. And boy, oh boy, was I in for a surprise the longer and longer I stayed involved with it. And the more that I really delved into it all, I uncovered what an amazing and deep world podcasting is.
Oh, yeah. You know, it's so funny. I think we all kind of have a piece of that story where we start a show and we might have some expectations or some anticipations or excitement about this, that, the other. And we're all end up being surprised at where the road takes us.
Yeah, very much so.
So tell us about your company and then also your show, Now Hear This Entertainment. Tell us about your show.
Well, my company is Now Hear This, or the formal name Now Hear This Incorporated, and it has always been founded on the concept of serving up-and-coming entertainers, so providing communications type services to them, and that's media relations, public relations, marketing, the web, social media. So I know there's struggles, but I also wanted to talk to people that are having success doing entertainment, but not at a level that these up-and-comers that I'm referring to can't relate to. So I didn't want to start a podcast and try to get Bruce Springsteen to come on, or Katy Perry, or Mariah Carey, people like that, because for the up-and-comer, they're going to say, well, I'm listening to John Bon Jovi talk about playing in sold-out stadiums around the world. I can't relate to that. Right. And I can't expect him to give me advice on how to get booked at better venues or how to get my music placed in film and television.
Let's be honest. John Bon Jovi has assistants out the yin-yang. He's not doing all the pedal stuff that the up-and-comers still have to do. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So I thought if I could find the people that are having success at a relatable level and then ask them questions on the podcast that will draw information out of them that will serve as lessons to those listeners who are up-and-comers, then I will achieve what I wanted, which is being of service to those listeners, but also showing these listeners that this Bruce guy knows a thing or two on his own as well. So maybe I should contact him and see if he could manage and promote me from a distance. And then, as I said before, it just really turned into this thing where I went, wow, hold on a minute. This isn't just about interviewing people and trying to do good service. This is really, really a whole world in and of itself, meaning podcasting.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You know what? A lot of people do exactly what you decided to do. They bring in a podcast on top of what they're doing for content creation, and they use it as a way to buttress their company and gain exposure and draw people in for potential clients and customers and stuff like that, and potentially become an influencer in their industry. But it sounds like, and I actually have witnessed this just in the last 6 months or so that you've been on my radar, that you've become an influencer in the podcasting space as well. So what are some of the opportunities that I know a couple, but I'll let you do your thing. What are some of the opportunities, doors that have opened since you've become a podcaster?
Well, here's the cool thing. So on my podcast, I Now Hear This Entertainment, I have interviewed guests ranging from the keyboard player for Aerosmith to the lead guitar player for Garth Brooks to the drummer for Joe Walsh, the trumpet player for Billy Joel. I've had a Grammy Award winner, a Rock and Roll Hall of Famer, a Las Vegas headliner, 2 Emmy Award winners, and then I've even talked to participants from American Idol, The Voice, America's Got Talent, and The X Factor. So the podcast is what has enabled me to meet and talk to these people, and now I consider them to be part of my contacts.
Oh, yeah.
Because these are people that have begun relationships with. So without a podcast, how would I have been able to talk to all those people? How would I have been able to meet those people and have a substantial conversation with them? Mm-hmm. Not to mention that, yes, as you started to allude to, this has also opened doors for me where people say, okay, this guy is running this podcast in such a way that we need to get him to our event to talk about how he is doing what he's doing with his podcast. Mm-hmm. So I was just a featured speaker up in our nation's capital at DC Podfest. In February, I'll be a featured speaker at Podfest Multimedia Expo in Orlando. And it's also opened doors for me, such as becoming an author, because I have a companion ebook series that complements my podcast. So again, all these things that I'm talking about, back in February of 2014, when I launched the podcast, I wasn't doing any of these things, and right. I wouldn't have if it wasn't for the podcast.
Exactly. And you know what? I can relate because I am also going to be a featured speaker at Podfest in 2018 in Orlando. So yay to that.
Awesome.
We share a bill. I feel so honored. See, I'm already learning music talk, just even talking to you for the last 2 minutes. We're on the same bill.
Very cool.
So in becoming a podcaster, you know, like I said, we have all these expectations and sometimes a lot of things surprise us, but also a lot of things surprise us about the process of podcasting too. What was kind of unexpected for you regarding that?
Well, you know, it's interesting because when I first started my podcast, I was so excited about the idea of doing it that I just wanted to get it started. I wanted to get it out the door. And that's a big mistake that podcasters make is they fall in love with the idea and then they sit and overanalyze it and they decide why they can't get it out the door real quick. Right. And they come up with all these excuses that end up putting them a year later in no different place than they were when they first thought it up.
100%.
And what I'm getting at is I found that by going to a recording studio and just doing my podcast there, I was able to get it out the door right away. Well, over 3 years' time, I got to the point where I formed a nice relationship with Tascam, who ultimately ended up hiring me to do a podcast for them, Yay! Which again is another opportunity that only comes from doing my podcast. And so it became to the point where they said, well, you know, we'd really much rather have you doing this on your own on all Tascam equipment, because if you're doing the Tascam podcast, we don't want people asking you questions and you go, oh, well, I don't know. I just go to a recording studio. I don't actually use the stuff. So, you know, it did kind of open my eyes to, okay, I don't want to say that I was naive in like, oh, this is what the guy at the studio is doing. But it really gives you this whole fresh new perspective on what all is involved with the podcast that you don't otherwise have. But Jaime, here's the thing. As I said before, if you have an idea for a podcast and you go to a recording studio, you're going to be able to get it out the door right away. And in that meantime, you can use that to say, okay, I guess I need to start learning some sort of digital audio workstation.
Right.
I guess I need to. And you can learn some stuff behind the scenes while still having a show that's getting released on time every week, if it's a weekly show, for example.
Exactly.
So it's really an eye-opener in terms of, okay, I guess there's more to this than it appears. Some people think, well, I can just record into my smartphone and I'm done.
There's a lot.
Sort of.
It depends on what kind of show you really want.
Well, but also, yes, okay, you just recorded into your smartphone. Now what?
Right. Exactly. There are apps that are popping up right now. I know there's one called Anchor that makes it super easy. I've actually done a little bit of review on it, and I use it from time to time, but it serves its purpose and it makes it simple, but it doesn't give you the depth of what a real podcast is. I mean, there's, a time limit on it. There are all these other limitations. So there are ways that are easy, but it limits you in the kind of show that you can really have and the quality of show you can have, unless you're willing to actually learn how to really do this stuff. I remember when I first started, I knew nothing when it came to editing and sound engineering. And I was like, level what? I don't know what you're talking about. I knew nothing about equipment. And my first several dozen episodes, it's obvious, because I was doing myself and I knew nothing. But you have to be willing to just let that go a little bit and just start diving in and realize you just need to take time to learn that stuff, So now I kind of have a sense of how deep that learning curve can be. And I've learned a lot, and my episodes have improved a bunch. I'm now producing shows for other people, but I know there's still a lot further that I can go. So what I'm saying is, to anybody who's listening to this as someone who's considering starting a podcast, is, don't discourage yourself to just get started with it.
Exactly.
You'll learn it.
Yeah. The other thing though is that, there's also, all we did just now, you and I, is we talked about recording it and then what do you do with it? And you talked about different ways that you could deal with that file.
Yeah.
But what about people who say, oh, well, how do I actually get it onto iTunes?
Right.
How do I actually get it onto Stitcher Radio?
Yeah.
And then there's the whole marketing side of it, which is what I speak to at these conferences. And even something like your network, Jaime, what you're doing, there's the whole side of podcasting, which is networking and keeping your eyes open for opportunities such as this. This Jaime person is launching this network. How do I get now hear this entertainment on there? So it's not just as easy as I spoke my podcast into my smartphone. I'm a podcaster.
Right.
That's a fraction of it. That's a fraction of it.
Absolutely. Well, actually, I meant to ask you, how did you find out about the directory and decide to go ahead and submit your show?
I'm pretty sure that it was either through the network that we've all formed with one another through Podfest Multimedia Expo and or through the Florida Podcasters Association.
Yeah, you're probably right. Somewhere along the lines. All right. Well, then, other than our directory, how can people find you, find your shows, get in touch? Give us a scoop.
So my podcast is called Now Hear This Entertainment, and thus the acronym is the website, nhte.net. And that's easy to remember because there's N's, E's, and T's in both of those. So nhte.net. If you go there, that's the website for the show, but then there's also buttons there that you can click on if you'd rather instead go over and get it from iTunes, Google Play Music, Stitcher Radio, SoundCloud, and TuneIn Radio.
Perfect. Well, Bruce, thank you so much for spending a few minutes with me. I am so excited to have you as part of this series and have your show in our directory, and I wish you nothing but the greatest of success. I can't wait to see you at Podfest. My pleasure. Thanks ever so much. And if anyone's listening who wants to know more about podcasting, do also check out Tascam Talkback that I mentioned briefly. That's a podcast that I do that is for podcasters and streamers. Just go to tascam.com, or it is also on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and TuneIn Radio. And again, it's Tascam Talkback. It's TASCAM. But thank you so much, Jaime. Thank you. Thanks for checking out another edition of the Directory Dial-Up. Meet this podcaster and other local podcasting talent in the Florida Podcast Directory. Or if you are a podcaster based in Florida yourself, submit your show. Simply head to floridapodcastdirectory.com to check out shows or for more information.